I read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't make sense at first until they did. Until the sharp, clipped coldness of it pierced through the fog of 5:06 a.m., slicing straight through the quiet of my apartment like a wire snapped in the dark. You were just the illusion. I cleaned it up. It was a text message. From Caleb Drexler. No greeting, no context. Just a few brutal lines. Effective immediately. Your services are no longer required. No severance. No explanation. Just that final sentence, like I'd been a smudge, he finally wiped off the screen. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my robe, coffee maker silent in the corner. My phone buzzed once more, calendar reminder, team call at 9. I let it ring out. For 13 years. I had built Vilmyratech from the inside out. I was the architect behind ArcLight, the AI defense mesh now licensed across 12 countries. I wrote the original line of code on a Thanksgiving night while everyone else was eating pie. I slept under my desk for weeks during our first product launch. I'd turned bugs into features and firestorms into breakthroughs. But Caleb wore suits that cost more than our monthly server bills. He was always the pitch man, the photo op guy, the voice in the keynote, the kind who could charm a table of investors blindfolded, but couldn't define a runtime error if it slapped him across the face. He called me his technical half. Now I was deleted. And yet, something wasn't right. I opened my laptop, logged in. No error. No lockout. I pulled up our internal dev platform still active, checked my admin credentials still greenlit, full system access, full privileges. That wasn't standard procedure. Terminations at Vilmyratech triggered automatic revocations. Unless the person who tried to terminate me no longer had the authority to do so. The numbness in my chest didn't ease, but it shifted just slightly into awareness. Something was broken, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't me. I closed the text and opened the source code. But illusions don't write core frameworks. Illusions don't debug through Christmas or sleep under their desks. I did. That line, "You were just the illusion," kept echoing like a cruel joke as I sat frozen in front of my screen. I hadn't moved much since reading Caleb's message at 5:06 a.m. The system still let me log in. My access was untouched. And yet, it wasn't just the shock of the firing, it was the quiet, bitter sting of being dismissed like I never existed. 13 years. We built Vilmyratech on borrowed Wi-Fi and caffeine pills. I wrote ArcLight's first prototype on a dented laptop in Caleb's garage, wrapped in 2 layers of sweaters because we couldn't afford heating. He brought the funding charm, the pitch decks, the dinners with investors. I built the foundation line by line, often in silence, often alone. And when the time came to file the patent, I gave up my name without hesitation. "It's cleaner if it's just one name," Caleb said. "Investors don't like complicated ownership." "I don't need the credit," I replied. "Just make sure it works." I meant it. Back then. I really did. I believed in the product, believed in him. He was more than a partner. He was like a brother to me. I thought what we were building was bigger than recognition. I thought loyalty was protection. Instead, it became a weapon I handed him. In the early days, he still introduced me as the technical architect, or the woman who makes ArcLight real. But slowly, the phrasing changed. I created the system, my vision for ArcLight. And I let it happen. Because I didn't care about the spotlight. Until I realized I wasn't just behind the curtain. I had been erased from the stage. Now, back in the present, I opened the patent registry. ArcLight Protocol V1.3. Inventor Caleb Drexler. Filing agent Vilmyratech. No mention of me, just as we'd agreed. Years ago. I'd seen it before. It always stung. But I told myself the code knew who wrote it. And then, I noticed something I'd never bothered to check. A link, view metadata. I clicked. A wall of technical data loaded on screen. I skimmed it, timestamps, registry codes, version control, until 3 lines stopped me cold. Author M.Q. Quinn, primary framework designer M.Q. Quinn, date of original creation, November 23rd, 2011. There it was, buried beneath the public version, not visible to press releases, not in the headline, but embedded deep in the bones of the system, not erased, just hidden. I stared at the lines, blinking more from memory than fatigue. The ache in my chest wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something older. That ache you feel when someone you trusted uses your silence as their power. And still underneath it all, I felt pride. Because that quiet version of me, she built something that still stood, even after they tried to write her out. My name lived in the structure, in the DNA of the product. Even if no one else ever saw it, the system knew. But for the first time in 13 years, I asked myself a new question. What if I didn't want to stay hidden anymore? I hadn't vanished. I'd just never been allowed to be seen. And now, maybe, that was about to change. He used to say, we built this platform together. We redefined cybersecurity. We proved it could be done. But somewhere along the way, we quietly became I. It didn't happen in a single moment. It bled in over time. A small omission in an article, a keynote slide that didn't mention my role, a blog post that credited Caleb as the inventor while calling me a key contributor. I'd brushed it off back then. It felt petty to care. I told myself the work mattered more than the credit. But now, after seeing my name buried in the metadata, I realized how far the erasure had gone. The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to read them. One of the clearest came during a Zoom call with a European investment group. They were interested in expanding ArcLight across the EMEA region. I'd spent 2 days preparing a technical assessment. I knew they'd ask about compliance data sovereignty, encryption resilience, GDPR frameworks. So when one of them raised a concern about integration risks, I responded naturally. There's potential for breach if we autoscale without secured chain verification, I said, especially with differing interpretations of user consent across borders. Before I could elaborate, Caleb cut in with a smooth smile. Exactly. Which is why we're implementing a transition. Mallory's role is becoming a bit redundant as we scale. Redundant? He said it so casually, like it was a compliment, like I should be proud I'd worked myself out of a job. I felt the air leave my chest. On screen. The investors nodded politely. No one blinked, but I did. I sat there, trying not to show it, even as something inside me cracked. After the call, Caleb messaged me directly. Sorry if that came off sharp. You know how these guys think. Founder control sells better. I said nothing. A few days later, he emailed me a short document labeled IP structure alignment. It came with a message that read, just legal housekeeping. Admin updates only. Need your signature to wrap this up. I barely read it. I was tired. I assumed it was standard post-funding paperwork. We'd done this dance before. I signed it. It wasn't until last night after digging into the patent system that I went looking for that document again. I found it in my archived inbox. Open the PDF. Page 3. Buried in legal jargon. Section 6. TUD. Primary IP holder retains full authority to transfer, modify, or reassign patent ownership without secondary consent, provided executive status remains active at the time of execution. My stomach dropped. I had signed away the last line of protection, my consent. With one careless signature, I had given Caleb the power to change the name on everything I built, and he had used it. I started remembering more moments, like when our company site quietly removed my bio, or when a reporter asked him where the idea for ArcLight came from, and he replied, "It came to me in the middle of the night. Just pure instinct, not a word about me, not even a nod to the years I spent engineering the framework." At the time, I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over, that my legacy was written in code, not in headlines. But now, I saw the truth clearly. Caleb hadn't just forgotten me. He'd actively overwritten me. Slowly, deliberately, and with strategy. And the worst part, I let him. I gave him my trust, my silence, and finally, my signature. I stared at the clause one last time. It was ironclad, legal, binding. But now I understood something he didn't. You can't own what doesn't belong to you. He had the flash, the spotlight, the speeches, the staged applause. But I had the framework, and I was done living in the dark. The morning after, I realized Caleb had used my signature to erase me. I didn't storm out. I didn't write a statement. I didn't make a scene. I simply shut down. I canceled my standing team calls, forwarded no emails, packed nothing. I unlinked my Valmira Tech inbox from my devices, turned off every notification tied to the company, deleted Slack. It was clean, quiet, deliberate. Some part of me believed that leaving without a trace would be the most graceful thing I could do. If they wanted me gone, fine. Let them live in the mess they built without me. I wouldn't beg for a seat at a table I had constructed. I told myself I didn't need justice to have dignity. In those early hours, I poured a second cup of coffee and opened an old folder on my desktop, archived drafts. It was where I kept half-baked prototypes, design sketches, and notebooks I'd written over the years. Ideas I hadn't touched since ArcLight consumed everything. Maybe now, without the weight of the company, I could finally build something for myself. But the silence was strange. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of silence that clings to you when you've been shut out of a place you once gave your life to. Still, I resisted the pull of curiosity. I didn't open any tech news sites, didn't check Velmeritech's socials. I told myself none of it mattered now. But truth has a way of finding you, even when you're trying to walk away from it. The message came just after 2:13 p.m. from Leo Grant, a back-end engineer I'd mentored years ago. He'd been one of the few who always asked how things really worked beneath the UI, who stayed late when deadlines weren't even his. Leo, I'm sorry. You should probably see this. There was a link, and below it, just one more line. He erased you completely. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew what clicking that link would mean. I'd see something I couldn't unsee. But I tapped it anyway. It opened to a digital cover story in Tech Slate Weekly, the visionary behind ArcLight, an exclusive with Caleb Drexler. His photo was centered, sleeves rolled, smirking slightly. That same knowing look he wore on Investor Day. The pull quote underneath made my stomach turn. It started with nothing but instinct and a whiteboard. ArcLight was born from a single vision. I skimmed faster. I remember that night in 2011, the idea hit me. Data should defend itself. That was the spark. There was no mention of a woman who slept under her desk coding that framework. No co-founder, no system architect, no Mallory Quinn. Then I found it, the line that closed the loop on everything. There was no one else. It was mine from day one. My breath caught. I didn't expect much. I knew I wasn't going to be thanked. But to be denied entirely. To be wiped from the record like I had never mattered. It wasn't just inaccurate. It was violence in sentence form. I stared at the screen. My reflection hovered faintly over his face on the magazine spread. For years, I'd let him have the spotlight. I'd told myself it was enough to know the truth in my own bones. I didn't need the applause. I had the code, the system, the substance. But this wasn't about ego anymore. This was about erasure. I looked back at Leo's message. Just 6 words. Words that landed harder than Caleb's coldest ones ever had. He erased you completely. And the worst part, he'd done it slowly, thoroughly, confidently, because he believed I'd never fight back. And until that moment. He was right. I closed the article. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I wasn't leaving quietly anymore. Because leaving quietly only works when the world remembers you were there. And clearly, it didn't. I didn't act right away. After reading Leo's message, he erased you completely, and seeing Caleb take full credit for ArcLight in that interview, I didn't throw anything, didn't scream, I just sat. And when I finally moved, I didn't go looking for revenge. I went looking for facts. Because facts, unlike people, don't lie. They sit quietly in servers and wait to be read. I reopened my laptop, logged into the Velmyra Tech executive portal, expecting a lockout screen. Some cold gray message telling me I no longer had access, but instead, it loaded. No alerts, no revoked credentials, no access denied. I blinked. The system recognized me as if nothing had changed. Senior IP authority. Full internal access. My admin keys still worked. My security tier hadn't been downgraded. That wasn't just a technical oversight. That was a crack. In our company's structure, executive-level terminations were required to be processed through the board of directors. Not even a co-founder could act unilaterally, especially not when it involved key intellectual property. A text message from Caleb at 5:06 a.m. might have been arrogant, but if he still had authority, it would have triggered auto-revocation. The system would have kicked me out by now, unless he didn't have the authority. I started digging. Velmyra Tech's internal archive was still open to me: meeting minutes, vote records, contract logs. There, buried in the most recent folder, was a file I hadn't seen before. BAUD minutes. Monday, 09:30.pdf. I opened it. It was the formal transcript of a board meeting held just 4 days earlier. 6 names listed, all present. The agenda: a motion to suspend Caleb Drexler from all executive authority, pending an internal investigation into the misappropriation of investor funds. The document was clinical. Bullet points, legal language, cold phrases like irregular discretionary withdrawals, non-compliant use of Series C capital, and executive overreach involving external shell entities. But the meaning was clear: Caleb had been under review. Silently, carefully, and the board had acted. Line by line. My eyes scanned for the vote. 6-0. Unanimous. All members in favor. 6 signatures at the bottom. No abstentions. No notes. I stared at them. Names I knew. Names I used to think were hand-picked by Caleb to protect him. Apparently not. Apparently, someone had finally pulled the curtain back. My hand hovered over the trackpad. For a moment, I didn't breathe. If this vote had taken place Monday, and if Caleb had lost all legal decision-making rights that day, then the text he sent me at 5:06 a.m. Tuesday was completely void. He didn't fire me. Because he legally couldn't, I was still, by every definition of our internal structure, a full executive, a full system owner, and still in possession of my authority over the ArcLight patent and its surrounding infrastructure. I had never left. The irony almost made me laugh. He'd tried to ghost me out of the company, but I was the one standing in the walls now, invisible to them but still holding the keys. They'd forgotten I'd built the architecture. I knew where everything lived, where it hid, and where it hurt. I downloaded the board file and saved a copy in a new folder titled Leverage. Then I logged out of the server, closed the lid, sat in silence. There was no need to rush, no need to shout. They thought I was gone, but I was still here. A ghost. Yes, but one with every credential still alive. And now, I knew exactly where to strike. I remembered the moment clearly, though I'd buried it under layers of exhaustion and blind trust. It was late, a Thursday, I think. We'd just finished a brutal 4-hour strategy call with a new compliance team overseas. My head was pounding, my inbox overflowing, and I was running on 2 hours of sleep and cold coffee. That's when Caleb handed me the document. Just admin cleanup, he'd said. Legal alignment stuff, nothing major. 1 signature and we're good. I didn't read it. Not really. My mistake wasn't missing the line. It was trusting that I didn't have to. Now, sitting in front of my screen, days later, that same document stared back at me like a time bomb I'd armed myself. The email subject was still there in my inbox: IP structure adjustment signature needed, dated 3 months ago. I clicked it open and opened the attachment slowly, deliberately this time. The familiar Velmyra letterhead, the sterile font, the bullet-pointed clauses that once blurred together. Now I read each one like they held a secret. Because one of them did. Clause 87.2. It was right there, buried 3/4 down the second page. In the event that one executive partner is no longer holding an active leadership title within the company, full authority to amend, rename, or reassign intellectual property shall default to the remaining active executive. My breath caught. I reread the line. Once, twice. There it was, in plain legal English. Not a loophole, not an interpretation, a trigger. And it had already been pulled by Caleb himself, because according to the board minutes I'd uncovered the day before, he'd been stripped of his executive title just 4 days ago. His name no longer held legal power inside Velmyra, which meant, by the very document he'd shoved in front of me, I now held full authority over the IP. He wrote his own surrender and handed me the pen. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt at first was tired. Tired of being tricked into signing silence. Tired of being told what mattered and what didn't. Tired of watching someone rewrite the truth while I stayed in the background and let him. But this clause wasn't written in a headline or whispered in a meeting. This was law. Filed. Signed. Witnessed. I scrolled to the bottom of the document, and something else caught my eye. A code. Long. Alphanumeric. Embedded in the footer. It wasn't random. I recognized the format. It was a multi-jurisdictional notary stamp. Velmyra used them for any document with cross-border IP implications. I copied the code and ran it through the global registry. The file came back as internationally notarized, legally binding in 13 countries, including every market ArcLight operated in. It wasn't just valid in theory. It was valid everywhere. I leaned back in my chair, stunned not by the power I suddenly held, but by how easily he'd handed it to me. Caleb was always impatient, always pushing things through without reading the fine print. That was his weakness: speed over substance, gloss over grit. And I had been the grit all along. I saved the document again, this time into my secured archive. I labeled it plainly Trigger Clause, Validated. It joined the board vote file in my folder marked Leverage. 2 documents. One removed Caleb's power. The other gave it fully to me. He thought he'd used me up, but I wasn't empty. I was ready. And the next time someone asked who really built ArcLight, I'd have more than memories. I'd have proof. Signed, sealed, and internationally enforceable. Because Caleb Drexler didn't just make a mistake. He made it legally irreversible, and he never even read the line. I didn't need anyone's permission, not anymore. After confirming the board had stripped Caleb of authority, after rereading Clause 87 and realizing the power had already transferred, there was only one piece left: the protocol. I designed it a year ago, buried in the back-end infrastructure, disconnected from Velmyra main operations system. No one except me knew how it truly functioned. Certainly not Caleb. To him, it was a formality, a precaution he insisted on after a scare at our Asia-Pacific division. When a local founder tried to walk off with a prototype, "I want a mirror system," he told me. "If someone tries to move the IP without proper status, it bounces back. Think of it like an automatic reset button." He didn't understand what he was asking for, but I built it anyway. A digital mirror, quiet, dormant, hidden inside an isolated environment that tracked real-time authority changes. It didn't care about titles or press releases. It read legal status, and when a change occurred, it followed the law, not the ego. I called it the Mirror Protocol, and now it was time to activate it. I retrieved a small black drive from my safe, plugged it into the secondary terminal I kept off-network in my home office. No camera, no synced access. The screen blinked to life with a command prompt and a single word authenticate. I typed my old admin key. Then a rotating passphrase I hadn't used since testing the system. Secondary auth biometric verification required. I placed my finger on the scanner. 2 seconds passed. Then came the final prompt, mirror protocol ready. Initiate check. YN. I paused, just for a breath. Then pressed Y. The screen flickered. Status lines began to scroll. Authority node A, Caleb Drexler. Legal status, revoked authority node. B, Mallory Quinn. Legal status active clause. 87. Validation triggered IP ownership. Flag transfer condition met mirror alignment in progress. I watched it process like I'd once watched rain race down a window pane, calm, methodical, inevitable, and then it stopped. Just one line at the center of the screen. Final control holder Mallory Quinn. Validated. That was it. No alert. No automatic emails. No system-wide disruption. Just the quiet confirmation that the name now legally bound to the patent, to ArcLight, to the entire infrastructure, was mine. He gave me the tool. I gave it purpose. I stared at the line, feeling the stillness settle in my chest. Not pride, not vengeance. Control. Cold, clear, irreversible. Caleb had thought Mirror Protocol was just a digital deadbolt, something to protect him from outside threats. But I knew better. Systems, when written right, don't serve people, they serve rules. And I had written this one to follow the one rule he never respected. Authority belongs to the one who stays standing. I closed the terminal, pulled the drive, locked it away again. No trace, no noise. There would be no fireworks, no headline. Just a subtle, silent shift in the structure beneath his feet, one he wouldn't even feel until it was too late. And when he did, it wouldn't be a bang, it would be the absence of control. Because while he polished his name in public, I'd embedded mine where it mattered. I didn't need a microphone, I had the code. And the code had spoken. I gave myself exactly 60 minutes. Not to panic, not to second guess, to verify. Everything. Because it wasn't enough to know I had the legal rights. Not when the system I'd spent over a decade building had become a battlefield for reputation, control, and buried truths. If I was going to act, it had to be bulletproof technically, legally, ethically. I wouldn't give Caleb a single crack to crawl through. I set a silent countdown timer on my screen. 1 hour, starting now. I opened my laptop and launched into the secure environment I'd built years ago, the one never connected to Velmiratech's mainframe. The one no one but me could access. I started with biometric verification. The foundation layer. The system scanned for fingerprints. My first 2 attempts, old scans from earlier builds, were rejected. That made sense. The biometric layer had been updated 3 months ago when we transitioned to multi-point encryption. I slid my finger across the updated sensor and waited. Biometric match. Mallory Quinn. Executive level authority confirmed. The screen flashed green. Good. Next. I opened the access logs for the IP registry system, where ownership data, request logs, and permission updates were time-stamped and archived. I filtered the records from the last 60 days. The list loaded. And there it was. User Caleb Drexler. Date 9 days ago. Action attempted, reassign IP ownership. Result, rejected reason, invalid authority. Insufficient executive credentials at time of submission. My eyes narrowed. He had tried to transfer the patent. He'd known the window was closing. Maybe he suspected something was shifting beneath him. He moved first. Quietly. But the system stopped him. Not because I intervened. Because the internal protocols we built to prevent unauthorized access had done what they were designed to do. The irony stung. He created the environment of paranoia. I enforced the systems to contain it. And now, those systems were protecting me from him. I copied the entry log, saved it into a new folder within my encrypted archive. I titled it Failed Reassignment Attempt, Drexler. The clock ticked past 22 minutes in. Next, jurisdictional validation. I logged into the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office portal, used my developer credential package to access back-end records for ArcLight's master registration. It loaded in under 10 seconds. Owner pending reassignment. Status flagged for internal conflict. I clicked into the resolution panel. A prompt appeared, last valid executive authority, Mallory Quinn legal trigger clause, active clause 87. Unilateral transfer permitted. Would you like to submit reassignment claim? Not yet. I needed backup first. I logged into WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. Our international filings lived here, spanning 13 jurisdictions. The dashboard loaded slowly, but the result was the same. Patent ArcLight Protocol, Core Framework Flag Request, attempted and denied due to authority mismatch. Caleb Drexler, current recognized holder under Mirror Protocol review. Valid authority detected MQ Quinn. I stared at the screen. My name, shortened but precise, pulsed like a quiet truth no one could ignore. Finally, I opened EUIPO, the European Union Intellectual Property Office. The patent record was clean. And beneath authorized representative, it now read Mallory Quinn, verified biometric match, valid contractual trigger. I took a steady breath. This wasn't a victory. Not yet. But it was structure. Proof. Walls built around the truth, reinforced by signatures, timestamps, and verified scans. I gathered all logs, biometric verification, IP system logs, jurisdictional flags, and saved them under one consolidated report. I time-stamped the document, encrypted it, and stored it under my leverage folder, which now included the board meeting minutes stripping Caleb's authority, the notarized Clause 87 contract, the Mirror Protocol trigger report, the failed IP transfer attempt by Caleb biometric confirmations, validation across 3 IP jurisdictions. 37 minutes left. I sat back, hands still on the keyboard. Everything was ready. Every access point closed. Every proof aligned. I hadn't skipped a step, hadn't taken a shortcut. He would never see it coming, because while Caleb had spent his energy racing headlines and courting investors, I had built the systems beneath his feet quietly, patiently, and now, those same systems had turned inward. I glanced at the countdown. 22 minutes remaining. All that was left was to pull the trigger. At 1:02 p.m., I clicked the final button. There was no sound, no digital fanfare, no confetti on the screen, just a small green box at the center of the page that read Transfer Complete. One line. That was all it took to shift $570 million of intellectual property from Caleb Drexler's name back into mine. I stared at it for a long second, the cursor blinking beneath the message like a heartbeat. I didn't move. I didn't exhale. In that stillness, it wasn't triumph. I felt it was alignment. For the first time in years, something was exactly where it belonged. The email arrived 31 seconds later. From the United States Patent and the Trademark Office. Subject confirmation of ownership transfer. Patent ID 87301 ARC. I opened it with calm hands. Inside was a formal attachment, time-stamped and notarized. The new line of ownership read clearly, MQ Quinn, sole legal holder. A single period at the end. Nothing dramatic, just final. I reached for my tea, which had long gone cold, and took a slow sip. The bitterness grounded me. Outside the window, the world went on unbothered. Cars inched down the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. But I'd just rewritten the foundation of an empire, and not a soul heard it. I had no interest in spectacle. Revenge wasn't the flame that lit my path. It was precision. This wasn't about retribution. It was about restoration. And I had restored the truth. I minimized the confirmation window and opened the encrypted contact list I'd maintained in the background for years. Quiet conversations, global partners, venture leaders, strategic clients who'd once spoken to me directly before Caleb's ego filtered the access. I had barely begun scanning the page when the first ping arrived, then the second, then 5 more. Subject lines filled the screen one by one. Re-Arclight licensing, confirming ownership transfer. Should we redirect our next round to Mallory, legal clarification, is MQ. Quinn. Our new point of contact, Mallory, congratulations. Shall we resume talks? Caleb forwarded us the old NDA. Should we reissue under your name? Are you now the authority for Arclight's Asia licensing? I closed my eyes for just a breath. Not fireworks, not headlines. Just gravity. The kind that tilts the floor back under your feet after someone tried to take it away. When I opened them again, I noticed the last email. It came from a domain in Zurich, a multinational firm I'd once negotiated with directly before Caleb sidelined me. I clicked it open. Mallory, we've just been notified of the legal IP shift. For formality, should we now list you as primary in our contracts? Also, we've held off finalizing the third installment of licensing fees pending this clarity. Happy to proceed if you confirm. Best regards, Ava Krill, Lead Counsel, Stration AG. A quiet smile touched the corner of my lips. It was never about the money, but seeing what he tried to control flow back toward me naturally felt right. Not stolen, not demanded, just reclaimed. I replied simply, yes. Please proceed. All documents can now be directed to MQ Quinn. I didn't CC Caleb. I didn't copy legal. I didn't need to. The system was already correcting itself. For a moment, I thought about the press, the shareholders, the board. How long it would take them to piece together what had just happened. Not long. The filings would go public within hours. The partners were already whispering. By the end of the day, the world would understand what Caleb had lost, not in a collapse, but in a redirection. Power didn't have to scream. Sometimes it just reappeared, where it had always belonged. I stood, walked to the window, and let the light fall on my face. I wasn't going back. I wasn't interested in titles or being welcomed home. I had something stronger now, a name that couldn't be erased, and ownership that couldn't be stolen again. The first call came at 1:04 p.m. Caleb, I let it ring. By the third call, he switched tactics, text messages, emails, even a Teams notification popped up. I stared at the screen without touching it. I had just signed away the final line. The last validation. The patent Arclight's backbone now bore my name alone. The world hadn't erupted. No headlines, no thunderclap. But inside their offices, chaos was already unraveling. The fourth call finally buzzed through with a voicemail. Mallory? What the hell did you do? Call me back. This isn't funny. I swear, delete. At 1:06 p.m., an email from the legal team arrived, titled in red urgent, request for action timeline. They were scrambling. I could feel it in the phrasing. Please provide confirmation of actions executed between 12:18 p.m. and 1:02 p.m. Documentation of authority per Clause 87. Notarized verification. If available. If available. I smiled quietly and pulled up the folder I'd prepared the night before. Timestamps. System logs. Signed and sealed certificates from the European IP Authority, the Singapore Patent Bridge, and the YPO interface. Clause 87 was marked in yellow, annotated, and indexed. I attached each file with calm precision, labeling them cleanly Step 1 Verification Log MQ.pdf, Clause 87 Extract Signed.pdf, Mirror Protocol Trigger Sequence.docs. At the bottom of the email, I added actions taken comply with internal procedure, International Registration Protocol, and Board Resolution 34-8A. Full documentation attached. Confirm receipt. I hit send. At 1:20 p.m., the board replied. It wasn't Caleb. It was Chairwoman Davina Marsh herself. Your actions were reviewed and deemed fully compliant. Mr. Wexler has been under suspension since Monday's motion. You held appropriate legal authority. This confirmation will be forwarded to our counsel and partners. Consider this matter settled. That was the first time I exhaled. But not because I feared I'd done something wrong. I just hadn't realized how long I'd been holding my breath, how deep that reflex had sunk over the years of navigating Caleb's ego and cleaning up his messes under the radar. Just 10 minutes later, Caleb tried again. This time, he sent an internal company memo rushed. Sloppy. It vaguely warned of irregular activity in the IP chain of custody and pending investigation. The file leaked almost instantly. Within the hour, I received 5 emails from international partners. One stood out, "Hi Mallory. Just confirming, should all future discussions route through you?" Now I didn't respond. Not yet. The contrast was too fresh. Their world was burning, and I hadn't even raised my voice. At 1:40 p.m., another message appeared. This one was private. From someone I hadn't spoken to in months, Elliot Rajan. One of the board members who used to ignore my input with that glazed look only men in Navy suits could perfect. His message was just 2 lines. "We got it wrong. You deserve better." I should have spoken up. I read it, closed it, let it sit like dust. In another lifetime, I would have cried, maybe written back something kind, something forgiving, but I'd passed that threshold the moment Caleb called me redundant on that investor Zoom call. Redundant. He had erased me in real time, as if I hadn't written the first 11,000 lines of ArcLight's foundational code, as if I hadn't stayed up 14 nights straight to patch the AI logic loop before its global demo, as if I hadn't walked into pitch meetings and watched men address Caleb, even when I was the only one holding the prototype. Now, I was the only one holding the future. The chaos was his, not mine. A quiet ping sounded on my laptop. I checked the calendar reminder, 2:00 p.m. Licensing Council, Zurich office, confirm participation. I tapped join meeting. My screen lit up with faces real players. No Caleb, no filters. And for the first time in 13 years, I introduced myself without hesitation, Mallory Quinn, co-architect of ArcLight. I'll be taking the lead from here. The call began, and the silence on their end, that was the sound of the empire shifting. I didn't respond to Caleb's 3rd call, or his 4th. I watched the screen light up, saw the name that once meant ally, brother in arms, builder of something great. Now it just meant noise. The moment I had the patent under my name, the air shifted, but not in the way I expected. No grand sense of triumph, just a cool, calm steadiness. Like the center of a hurricane, there was no need for vengeance, only clarity. By 1:15 p.m., I had already begun drafting the license terms, not to punish them, not to humiliate them, but to draw a line so clear it couldn't be mistaken again. If they wanted to use ArcLight, the system I co-created, the system they claimed and nearly buried me beneath, they would have to come through me. On my terms. I opened the document template. At the top, License Agreement ArcLight IP Deployment. Beneath that licensor, Whitlow Technologies, LLC. The name made me pause. Whitlow, my mother's maiden name. The name on the LLC I registered 6 years ago. Quietly, with a $5 retainer and a whisper of hope. Back then, I wasn't sure what it would become, maybe a consultancy, maybe just a backup plan, but I'd left it dormant, protected, ready. Now, it was the gateway. I thought of her words from years ago, after I'd cried into a bowl of lentil soup at her kitchen table, broken from an earlier betrayal in another company. She had placed a hand over mine and said, "Justice doesn't beg to be seen. Mallory, it waits. And when the world catches up, it stands." That voice guided me now. The terms weren't excessive, just precise. Any license to use ArcLight would require full attribution to its original framework designer. All future iterations would list both parties. Financial proceeds from any sublicensing would follow a 51-49 revenue split majority to Whitlow. And, critically, all security audits would be conducted independently, not by internal compliance teams. The email to ArcLight's legal division was short. I attached the contract. No emotion, no threats. Just a subject line, updated licensing terms. Effective immediately before I could close the window. A reply landed. Subject urgent clarification needed. Whitlow Technologies. I smiled. Within 10 minutes, another came in. From Rohan, the lead partner from our Singapore rollout. Just saw the transfer. Congrats. Mallory. Should we initiate a new agreement with you directly, then one from Brussels? So, do we speak to Whitlow now? They didn't seem surprised. Not at all. That told me something they had always known. Maybe not all the legal intricacies, but the essence. They'd seen the meetings, the demos I'd led, the questions I answered when Caleb stayed vague. They remembered who built the bones of Arclight. The power wasn't in the system, it was in the name behind it. And now that name was mine again. By 2:20 p.m., Caleb finally stopped calling. I received a short email from his assistant, likely drafted under pressure. We've received the updated documentation. Mr. Vance will be reviewing his options. He didn't have many, and I wouldn't deny them use of the platform. That wasn't the point. This wasn't a door slammed shut in revenge, it was a turnstile. You could enter, but only by acknowledging who built it. That was my justice. As I stepped out into the soft light of the afternoon, a breeze lifting the edges of my coat, I didn't feel like a winner. I just felt restored, quiet, present, and somewhere deep inside, a voice familiar and warm whispered, "Justice doesn't beg to be seen. It waits." Today, it stood. I sat behind the velvet curtain, listening to the low hum of voices rising from the conference hall. Stage lights bled through the edge of the fabric, casting warm slices across my lap. The placard in my hand read Mallory Quinn, keynote speaker. I ran my thumb over the embossing again and again, as if touching my name made it more real. 2 weeks ago. The invitation came in quietly subject line, Global Tech 2025 closing address. The topic, ethics in innovation and attribution. I stared at that email for a full minute before opening it, half expecting to find it misaddressed. But the body was clear. I hadn't been asked to join a panel. I was asked to close the event. I wasn't sure if I belonged out there. I murmured, more to myself than to the handler waiting beside me, until I saw my name printed first, not footnoted. She smiled. You're up in 2. The room beyond that curtain held over 1,000 people engineers, founders, executives, analysts, the best of the best. The same crowd I used to admire from the sidelines while Caleb smiled on stage and called himself the father of Arclight. That day, I wasn't behind the code anymore. I was standing inside it. The MC announced my name. Applause followed, not explosive, but warm, like recognition. I stepped onto the stage, into the light, and blinked against the sudden brightness. The LED backdrop towered behind me. Global Tech, honoring the minds behind the code. I reached the podium and exhaled. My name is Mallory Quinn, I began. And until last month, most of you didn't know that. The room hushed. I spent 13 years building a system meant to protect people, Arclight. Some of you use it every day and don't even know it. That was always the point. We wanted it to be invisible, but somewhere along the way, I became invisible too. I let that sit. Today, I want to talk about names, the ones we give, the ones we withhold, and the ones we try to erase. I told them what I could. Not the legal intricacies, not the drama, just the truth. That when I stepped back from Arclight's launch credit to help the company raise funding, I did it out of trust. That trust was broken, and that system's built on erasure whether of people, ethics, or truth eventually collapse. I didn't speak Caleb's name. I didn't need to. I've heard people say attribution is about ego, I said. But for me, it was never that. It's about accountability. It's about being visible enough to take responsibility for what we create, and proud enough to stand behind it. Applause swelled again. I wasn't shaking this time. When I finished, I took a small step back from the podium and gave a slight bow. The audience rose. I wasn't prepared for that. Some clapped slowly, some cheered, some just stood and nodded, as if they had been waiting years for someone to say it out loud. Then came the moment that undid me. A woman in the third row, gray-haired. Sharp-eyed, raised her hand as the applause quieted. "I just wanted to say," she called out, her voice steady and clear, "my daughter codes because of you. She followed the traces you left, the ideas you shared online. You never knew it, but you mentored her from afar. And today, she leads a team of her own." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. There were no words, just a quiet heat rising behind my eyes. I nodded, hand over heart. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." After the event, people approached me, investors, students, fellow developers. They asked thoughtful questions. Some offered business cards. Others just said thank you. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like restoration. Like someone had gently set my name back where it always belonged. Outside the venue, the late afternoon sun reflected off the mirrored windows, painting the sidewalk gold. I caught my reflection in the glass, a woman not hiding anymore. A woman no longer waiting for recognition to find her. A woman who reclaimed it. Caleb hadn't answered any of my follow-up messages since the legal shift. He didn't need to. The system already had. The transfer was done. The permissions, signed. The history, restored. And still, I hadn't destroyed a thing. I walked slowly toward the rideshare line, my phone buzzing in my coat pocket. A message from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line made me smile. "We're ready to talk licensing on your terms." I looked back once at the banner above the glass doors, my name listed alone beneath keynote speaker. They had tried to erase me, but I built the system, and it remembered. There was a time I believed quiet work would speak for itself, that if I just kept building, kept showing up, the system would be fair. But I've learned something far more powerful. Your name deserves to be seen. Your voice deserves to be heard. We don't always get justice in the moment, but we can create it, piece by piece, with strategy, courage, and patience. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been erased, underestimated, or replaced, know this: you're not alone, and your worth isn't defined by the people who failed to see it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to reclaim what was yours? Drop a comment below, and let's start a real conversation. If this resonated with you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe. I've got more stories like this about resilience, power, and silent victories that I'd love to share with you. Because sometimes the strongest revenge is simply being undeniable.